3 minutes after 10 is the time. I was quite pleased with it. I probably didn't come up with it first, but it's Lady Bracknell, isn't it? To lose one parent may be regarded as a misfortune, but to lose two looks like carelessness, she said, or words to that effect in Oscar Wilde's rather brilliant Importance of Being Earnest. So I thought to lose one ethics advisor may be regarded as misfortune, but to lose two looks a lot like corruption. And don't take my word for it. Lord Geidt said relatively recently that resignation from the role, which he only took up last year, would be a last resort. That, and I quote, sends a critical signal into the public domain. I've got two quick things to say before we get stuck into this conversation. The first is this. Let us imagine, and I don't know whether it's beyond the realms of possibility, but let us imagine for a moment that Lord Geidt's resignation letter, when it is published, says something like this. It says something like, do you know what? I'm really sorry, boss, but I've had enough. I won the lottery last week, and Mrs. Geidt, Lady Geidt, has bought a yacht, and we're just going to clear off to Bermuda for a couple of years. Well, in other words, if his resignation, when we see this letter, has absolutely nothing to do with his view expressed this week that the party's scandal was unconscionable, or that it was probable, I think is the correct word to use, that Boris Johnson had broken the ministerial code. He's made his frustrations clear. But let us imagine, not pretend, but imagine that the letter makes it clear that he hasn't resigned over his disillusionment or dissatisfaction with Boris Johnson. The bloke before did. Alex Allen did resign after Boris Johnson refused to act upon an investigation that found Priti Patel to be a shameless bully. Here's what would happen in much of Britain now, in much of the media and political sphere. People would start claiming it as a victory now. People like Quentin Letts would pop up on Good Morning Britain, where he had his pants roundly pulled down by Adil Ray this morning. If you haven't seen that clip, I recommend it. It's an absolute masterclass in holding people, or insisting that people confine their commentary to the realms of objective reality. You'd have Daily Mail columnists and other client journalists queuing up to claim it as a victory if the second ethics advisor to resign from Boris Johnson's government turned out not to have done it on a point of principle. That, I think, is the best illustration I can think of how corrupt everything has become. They would try to sell it to you as proof that all of those biased lefties like Tobias Ellwood and Brexit hardman Steve Baker have really come a cropper this time, because it turned out that Lord Geidt actually resigned to spend more time with his golf clubs, and it had absolutely nothing whatever to do with the ministerial code or principle or anything else. And I'd just say briefly, it's not, well, I think it's highly unlikely, but it's until this letter is published, and the question you need to ask yourself this morning is, why aren't Downing Street publishing these letters? It's pretty clear that Lord Geidt would like them to. But let's pretend now, rather than imagine, that it is the case that this resignation has nothing to do with principle. Can you really look me in the eye, especially if you're still tugging the forelock, if you're still doffing the cap at Downing Street? Can you really look me in the eye and tell me that there wouldn't be an incredibly disingenuous and dishonest attempt to portray the fact that an ethics advisor has resigned without condemning the Prime Minister in terms as some sort of victory? There just would be, wouldn't there? And that's mad. That's mad. So he can ignore an investigation into his own Home Secretary's bullying and prompt the resignation of his own independent advisor. You'll remember it's only a couple of weeks since the anti-corruption czar that he appointed himself, originally appointed by Theresa May, John Penrose, husband of Dido Harding, but in July of 2019 that appointment was remade, if you like. He was reappointed by Boris Johnson in the role of anti-corruption czar. He felt he had to step down from that role just before the no-confidence vote. So in just under 3 years as Prime Minister, Boris Johnson has now lost 2 independent ethics advisors, almost certainly, our little imagination game notwithstanding, almost certainly both on fairly profound points of principle, and his own anti-corruption champion. That's not normal. I said to you on Monday, I was beginning to get worried that we had a kind of Trump-style saturation underway now, that there was just so much rotten stuff going on that it was becoming very, very difficult to properly scrutinise and report it. And I said to you on Monday, this might just be a Monday morning thing. It might just be because I've had a nice relaxing weekend, a book festival and a barbecue, and I've not really been concentrating, and I've taken my eye off the ball. So I come into work on Monday morning and I think, right, what are we going to talk about today? And I sort of go, oh my holy days. There's just too much to choose from. Where are we even going to start? Do we start with the illegal actions over Northern Ireland, with the breach of the treaty that got him elected? Do we start with these despicable attempts to deport entirely innocent people to the other side of the world while claiming that it's somehow for their own good? Do we start with the ramifications of the vote of no confidence that they are already trying to pass off as a victory? Do we start with the state of the NHS, which is becoming parlous, or the state of the economy, which is predicted to be among the worst in the world by this time next year? Where do we even start with this mess? But it wasn't a Monday morning thing, I'm afraid. I do find it increasingly difficult to know where to begin, simply because we're drowning now in sleaze and corruption. We're drowning in it. And this analogy isn't brilliant, and hopefully it will improve in the course of the morning, but it's as if we're drowning in it and you don't know which sort of litre of water to focus on first, because there's just so much of it. And I'm a little bit scared, because the independent ethics advisors are not, quotes, biased, end quotes, BBC journalists, or, quotes, lefty lawyers, end quotes, or, quotes, screeching Ramonas from the mainstream media commentariat, end quotes. These are the people, in two cases, that Boris Johnson himself appointed to keep an eye on standards and to keep an eye on corruption. And they have resigned in protest at what they see as epic breaches of standards and indeed corruption. His own appointees. Just think about that for a minute. You've got a cabinet populated entirely, almost entirely. You know me, I'm desperate to give a break to at least one or two of them, because the alternative is too bleak. I still think, despite him not exactly having covered himself in glory subsequently, I still think, for example, that someone like Nadeem Zahawi does lie awake at night wondering how the hell he's ended up being part of such a corrupt administration. I think people like Ben Wallace probably dream of the day when they can get rid of Boris Johnson and hopefully begin to restore some national pride and indeed some party integrity. But I don't know. I could be wrong. I've been too generous, perhaps, again. But I have to believe that. As I say, the alternative is simply too bleak. But the rest of the cabinet is populated by absolute inadequates, sycophants on a scale we've never seen before in British politics. Even in Tony Blair or Margaret Thatcher's heyday, you needed more than mere forelock tugging and blind sycophancy to advance. You needed to have at least a scintilla of competence. You needed to be able to demonstrate a grasp of your brief. You couldn't turn up at a select committee and display ignorance on a scale that is nuclear in its scope, as Nadine Dorries has done now on more than one occasion. Or I mean, incompetence coupled with arrogance on such a grand scale that you wonder whether you've accidentally stumbled into an Armando Iannucci film, as is almost always the case when Dominic Raab opens his mouth. You have a cabinet populated almost entirely now by inadequates and sycophants, because the only qualification for the job is that you won't say boo to a Boris. You won't raise any objections to his continuing catastrophe of corruption. That's the only qualification you need. You don't even need any more to have an IQ in double figures to become a Secretary of State. It's incredible. But you can get your head around that. That's what happens when you are elected upon a platform of lies and embellishments. It's what happens when you tell people that a deal is oven ready and then 2 years later prepare to break international law in order to wriggle out of the deal that you signed. That's what happens when everything leads back to Brexit. But this stuff is different. These are the people he has appointed in order to give an illusion, if you like, of honesty. Well, look, we can't be that rotten because we've got an independent ethics advisor, folks. But he's just resigned. And the last one did as well, because your Home Secretary is a bully. And you won't do anything about it, which is, of course, a betrayal of everybody in the Home Office, the civil service and beyond, in order to protect a sycophant, because, of course, it goes two ways. If you are slavishly loyal to a Prime Minister, he has little choice but to back you even when you've been found to be corrupt, in Owen Paterson's case, or to be a shameless bully in Priti Patel's case, or to have stayed on the beach in Greece when Kabul fell in Dominic Raab's case. This is not normal. But the independent advisors on ethics are supposed to be the last chance saloon for standards, the last chance saloon for decency. And he's now got a 100% record of seeing them walk the plank rather than continue to be party to his corruption. That is objectively incredible. 2 down. How many to go? And who would take the job now as Boris Johnson's independent ethics advisor? Who, apart perhaps from Grant Shapps, would be so utterly devoid of shame that they would even contemplate taking a job like that? And of course Shapps can't. It's not a job for an MP. So I do have a question. You'll be very relieved and delighted to learn, and I am now going to ask you that question. Lord Geidt, when he took up the role last year, described resignation as a last resort that sends a critical signal into the public domain. Like, these are huge, huge words. It's a last resort that sends a critical signal into the public domain. Here's my question and my increasingly profound fear, right? Has the public domain now become so curdled by corruption and so riddled with lethargy almost in the face of so much of it that the public domain no longer notices critical signals like this? Have we, in other words, reached the point where the water is at our nostrils and we can't cope anymore with the amount of water? And if not, how do you hang on to it? How do you hang on to the sanctity, if you like, of the public domain, the importance of integrity, the role of decency and honesty? 2 independent ethics advisors and an anti-corruption champion in under 3 years. There can be no more telling indication of just how rancid this administration and this Prime Minister have become. Let's be kind. Some of us thought that was the case from the start, but let's just deal with post-July 2019. 2 independent ethics advisors and 1 anti-corruption champion leaving in protest at a Prime Minister essentially breaching their brief, doing the things they are there to guard against. That's incredible. But has the public domain now become so curdled by the sheer scale of these issues and these problems that things which once would have been absolutely epic in both impact and importance have become business as usual? And how can we fight against that? 0345 6060 973. Because in America, politicians who inflate and amplify Donald Trump's blatant lies about the last American election are now getting re-elected. They're coming back round again in primary elections. Lying about an election result has become commonplace at the highest levels of American politics. We're not there yet. How on earth do we put the brakes on this cavalcade of corruption at the very heart of our democracy? And please, don't take my word for it. Take the word of the man Boris Johnson appointed to be an anti-corruption champion, of the man Boris Johnson appointed to be his independent advisor on ethics and standards, after the last one resigned because Boris Johnson did nothing in response to an investigation that found the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, to be a shameless bully. 0345 6060 973. I don't want you to say yes, but I think you might. We have reached a point where it's almost impossible to paddle now in the lake of corruption and sleaze that Boris Johnson has poured all over our heads. But how do you hang on to it? Give me a call, because I think I need your help. 0345 6060 973. 10:21 is the time. I suppose in a way I'm doing that Orwell quote in reverse. How do you stop yourself going mad when it is just so obvious now that our administration is riddled with corruption and sleaze? Orwell's answer was always, you hang on to the truth. Even if you are the only one, you will not go mad. Let me show you what sort of 1984 style client journalism looks like. In the Daily Mail today, a writer called Stephen Glover concludes that all of these issues that I've just alluded to may yet be the making of Boris Johnson. So the more sleaze, the more corruption, the more dishonesty, the more resignations on grounds of principle there are, Daily Mail columnists are now reduced to claiming the more likely it becomes that Boris Johnson will somehow prevail. So many enemies like the man he appointed to be his independent ethics advisor, the man he appointed to be his anti-corruption champion. So many battles, yet ironically they could still be the saving of Boris. And I've stopped thinking that these people are bending the knee or doing it for coins. That you have to delude yourself to stay loyal to something so obviously wrong. So I look at America. I don't know whether these Republican politicians who are now seeking Trump's endorsement honestly think that the election was stolen from them or that fraud was committed. Maybe one or two of them do. The rest know it's nonsense, but it's self-interest and survival that prompts them to repeat and amplify Trump's lies. I think it's different here, in the media at least. These people honestly believe that they're on some sort of mission to save and protect a prime minister whose own ethics advisors and anti-corruption champions can no longer stomach the sight of. It's incredible. Katie's in Bushy. Katie, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James. I'm a first-time caller, and I've been listening to you for the last few years. It's great to speak to you.
Thank you.
I just had to pull my car over and call in as soon as you were doing your introduction. What notes I kind of said to myself are, if he's the one who's appointed them, then who comes next?
It's baffling.
If they stood down, whether they were pushed or they've walked themselves, who then does Boris Johnson get to choose who gets appointed next in their position?
But they struggled to find anyone when Lord Geidt took the job. Simon Case and the Cabinet Secretary and Boris Johnson sort of went around the houses, and Geidt was finally persuaded to take up the position, and at which point he said that resignation would send a critical signal into the public domain, that it would be a last resort, and less than a year later, here we are.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was saying to your researcher, it kind of reminds me of the film Titanic, where the character Mr. Esme, he's the one who's, I think he's designed the ship, or he says, oh, this ship can't sink, and Mr. Andrews says, she's made of iron, sir. I assure you she can. And when you see the ship, the water entering the Titanic, Mr. Ismay is literally one of the first on the boats with the women and children to save his own backside. And never mind anyone else. And it just reminds me of that. Maybe Lord Geidt and Mr. Allen, they're people like Mr. Ismay.
I don't know if that's fair, because they're not, I mean, well, maybe... I don't think they would have said that the boat was unsinkable. I think the fact that they both acknowledged, crikey, I mean we're now picking over the bones of your rather brilliant analogy. I think what I want to do is nudge it and say,
thank you.
What it is, well, where we are now is the boat is sinking, but there is still there are people on board claiming that it's not. And you have Stephen Glover writing in the Daily Mail that the more water that comes aboard, the more likely it could be the saving of Boris Johnson.
And you've got the violinists and the celloists playing la-di-da-di-da. Let's not panic here. Let's just put your life jacket on and go to the top deck. Don't panic, people. It's okay. Look, we've got music playing. Listen to that, rather than hearing the screams of people drowning below you.
Crikey, you're really going all in on this one, aren't you, Katie?
Oh, thank you for the opportunity, James. I love
you're
your
more
show
than welcome.
That's
a break.
I love your show.
Thank you.
I just wanted to put that little bit of input.
I love it.
Like you said, I don't know if I can help you, James, but I'm going to throw something in there and just see what your listeners think of it and what the response is.
Let's do it. No, your company is comfort enough. Thank you, Katie. It is if, indeed, the hull is holed below the waterline, and some people are claiming that it's not holed at all. And it's not enemies of the fleet that are describing the holes in the hull. It's the man appointed to keep an eye out for holes in the hull. I mean, it's incredible. You've got the man appointed to keep an eye out for holes in the hull, pointing at the holes in the hull. The captain's saying there are no holes in the hull, so the bloke appointed to look out for holes in the hull has resigned. And yet still people on the deck are claiming that this is the best boat they've ever been on and everything's going swimmingly. And Stephen Glover in the Daily Mail is writing about how the more water comes on board, the safer the ship will become. This is not normal. This is the United Kingdom. This is our land. And the captain is currently, clown is far too kind a word to describe him. Who are you looking for? Munira Mirza, someone's just reminded me, one of the architects of culture war. She walked the plank in disgust at something he did that even I've forgotten. And I keep track of all this stuff for a living. Every single person that he comes into contact with ends up either corrupted or resigning. It's insane, and I don't know how it ends. Do you? 0345 60 60973. Steve's in Fife. Steve, what would you like to say?
James, when is somebody in this cabinet going to have 1 ounce, I don't know what the word is.
Integrity, decency, honesty.
Yeah, you know what I mean? See these rubber dinghies that are coming across the channel?
Yes.
I'm going to jump in one and go the other way. Right? I'm off. I'm okay. I'll leave it all behind because what we've got the same up here with Nicola Sturgeon and Boris Johnson. They want to be king and queen. See when they get independence and they'll get married and they'll sail off and we'll be left.
I'll get told off now for not challenging you, but I am challenging you. I'm not including Nicola Sturgeon in today's analysis. She hasn't had 2 independent ethics advisors resign. She hasn't had an anti-corruption czar walk the plank. She hasn't populated her cabinet with sycophants and cronies, and the catalogue of inadequacies does not apply, as far as I can tell, to Scottish politics. But you're more than entitled to make your point and indeed to say it on this.
I'll tell you what. I didn't want the country to break up, but somebody's got to stand up to him. Somebody's got to help.
Who?
These guys are just walking away,
Who would you point at? Who would you expect better from? Because the cabinet has been very carefully constructed to contain almost no courage.
It's like the Knights of the Round Table. They're protecting them.
But who would you think might break cover? Who might do the right thing?
I agree with you. The Minister of Education.
So the Nadeem Zahawi. I don't know why. I don't know that much about him, except that everyone I know in education breathed a sigh of relief after he'd been in the job for a week, because, of course, it was Gavin Williamson before him. So maybe we're being a bit too kind, Steve. Being better than Gavin Williamson wouldn't really be a qualification to become shoelacer-in-chief in a branch of Timpsons. That's a joke, by the way, not a criticism of people who work in Timpsons, because nobody in Timpsons is the shoelacer-in-chief. They are skilled cobblers and key cutters. Gavin Williamson would struggle, I think, to lace his own shoes. So the fact that Nadeem Zahawi is better than Gavin Williamson isn't necessarily an enormous vote of confidence. But I don't know why him and Ben Wallace perhaps seem to be... They're like the Obi-Wan Kenobis of the cabinet, aren't they? They're our last chance. And that's terrifying. One of them is qualified by dint of not being as awful as Gavin Williamson, which I'd like to think is a description that might apply to pretty much everybody in the country, with the exception of his cabinet colleagues. And the other one, Ben Wallace, had a very good Ukraine, but apart from that, we know next to nothing about him. And they're our best chances of somebody standing up and saying, up with this, we will not put. This is over. 10:30 is the time. 03456060973 is the number you need. Holly Harris is here now with your headlines. It is 10:33. That urgent question in the House of Commons on Lord Geit's resignation, I think, has prompted Downing Street to let it be known that they will publish the letter. That's been reported in the last couple of minutes, so keep an eye out for that. In the meantime, what do you think of this? Who do you think wrote this? Why is it that the worst people often rise to the highest office and stay there? For me, it isn't important what job you do or your title, but it is vitally important why you do the job and what you achieve. Boris has to go. He just has to. You can't survive judgment like this. I'll give you a clue. It was the same person that wrote, no party in the last 100 years has done more damage to Wales than the Conservatives. The historical evidence here is painfully clear. Voting Tory in Wales is a form of self-harm. Here's another one. It's unbelievable. 1 in 3 children in Wales grow up in poverty. That kind of tragic statistic takes decades of neglect to create, and no party in the last 100 years has done more damage to Wales than the Conservatives. The historical evidence here is painfully clear. Now, which biased BBC journalist or screeching Ramona or lefty lawyer do you think said that? Yeah, I think you've probably worked out that the person who said that is none of those things. He is, in fact, the man that the government has just appointed to be the cost of living czar, a chap called David Buttress, former chief executive of Just Eat, now works in venture capital, and he's accepted a job as cost of living business czar. It's an unpaid role, one imagines, because he thinks he will be able to do good. And with respect to Mr. Buttress, there must have been a slight appeal to his vanity, because he was quite right in his analysis of the person who's offered him this job in the tweets that he subsequently deleted. So Downing Street, under Boris Johnson, does due diligence on a man that it's looking to appoint to a prominent position at a time of genuine crisis, and they find someone who holds Boris Johnson in even lower regard than you do, or I do. Possibly the same, let's say, not lower. I mean, what is that, if not epic incompetence or evidence they can't find anyone for a big job now who hasn't gone on the record with their honest thoughts about Boris Johnson? This is not normal. 10:35 is the time. James is in Exeter. James, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James.
Hello.
I'm in a bad way this morning. So I'm a school teacher. This is my 10th year on the job. I've 10 years in teaching, and it's my job every day to tell my students that they can achieve what they want to achieve as long as they work hard for it. And it's my job to say to people every day that kindness and compassion are the things that really matter in this world. And you know, as a teacher, I work in a school. It's my job to say follow the rules. We follow the rules because if we all follow the rules that we've set as a society, then everything works better, and we all. I don't know how I can. I don't know how I can. What am I supposed to say to my students, to the kids who I adore, to the kids that come to me with questions? How am I supposed to tell them that they can enjoy the fruits of their labour and they can achieve what they want to achieve in this society, in this world, when the evidence of our eyes and ears every single day is that the only thing that matters is your contacts. The only thing that matters is your ability to evade consequences from actions through money or corruption or the school you went to or the job that you're in. I don't have an answer to your question.
I feel I have to try. I feel I owe it to you to try, and my answer may not delight you. People who attended the same school feel the way that you feel. But people who have benefited from the relatively unfair system that you describe also feel how you feel. His own housemaster at Eton, as you know, said that he honestly believes that it is churlish of us not to regard him as an exception. And this is the line I want you to remember. Teacher to teacher, remember this. One who should be free of the network of obligation that binds everyone else. Now, the network of obligation binds everyone else. That is what you are teaching your children. That is what you're teaching your pupils. And that's what Boris Johnson's High Master at Eton failed to drill into him. The network of obligation binds everyone else. So the exception to that network, the anomaly, the monstrous corrupter of the obligation that binds everyone else should not be robbing you of your resilience and your strength and your pride in the job that you do. You need to try, if I may, you need to see him as the exception that proves the rule. Because
I'd love to.
Because the triumph. Don't interrupt me when I'm on a roll. Because you're a teacher. You're a teacher. You should know this. Sit down, James Minor. The triumph of someone as awful as this is actually evidence of how important the network of obligation that binds everyone else is. This is what happens when someone trashes it. And that's why it's so important that you teach these children what you've been teaching them for 10 years and what Boris Johnson's own teachers tried but sadly failed to teach him.
I mean, I love that. I believe in that. I hope that's true. I really do.
It is. It has to be.
I have to. What the problem I face, of course, is that, you know, I've worked in one of the independent schools you're describing as well, by the way, and I've never met a Boris.
Exactly.
I've only ever met good people.
Yes.
I've only ever seen the best in them. But for some reason, somehow, some way, this man who has slipped through or denied himself, you know, the network of obligation you're talking about, he's supported by a network of his own, made up of people from all walks of society who are buoying him up and saying, reading, the front page of the Daily Mail every day. He's right. He's doing the right thing. He made all the right calls.
But
how do you justify that? How do you take this man who is the exception to the rule?
In the case of the Daily Mail, let me tell you again. In the case of the Daily Mail, you have to remember that to get to the top job on the Daily Mail now, it was the last editor was a brief and welcome respite from this madness and delusion. But to get into that top job, you have to be the uber reader. It's not that they sit there cynically stoking the fires of their readers' prejudices and bigotries and fears, most obviously. The top man on the Daily Mail, the owner might know that it's all nonsense designed to keep the money pouring in, but the editor is just as terrified of modernity, just as terrified of change or of a scant understanding of what Labour means as the readers are. So that they are, again, exceptions to the rule. The massive majority of journalists, even on a newspaper like that, be relatively disgusted by the editorial line that is taken. But to get into the top job, if you eschew the decency and the integrity that the rest of us value, you become an exception that proves the rule. You don't become the rule, because human history teaches us that these people are not the norm. The norm is you. The norm is what you teach your pupils, and we have to carry on, because there's never a victory. It's never over. It's just a constant pushing back against the forces of abnormality, the forces of demagoguery, the forces of delusion. And the bigger those forces get, the more important your role becomes as an educator of young minds, that you continue to teach them about the network of obligation that binds everyone else, James. And I suspect you're pretty good at it.
I've never been happier to be described as a norm.
You are my norm.
I hope there are more norms out there. May I add just one thing about the quote from David Balshrus earlier on?
Yeah.
I hadn't heard that before you said it on the radio just now, but I found there was something quite revealing in it, and maybe I've just got my teacher head on this morning, but the use of the term self-harm in such a callous and lackadaisical way. I've heard it a lot in recent years with people describing Brexit, the effects of Brexit on the country. I just want to, throw my 2 cents in that self-harm's not something to be likened to what we're experiencing as a country right now, and it's
because it conjures up the reality of that horror for people who have actually done it. I'm guilty of what you described, very guilty. I've used the phrase self-harm to describe Brexit on many occasions, and I'll have a proper think about that before, and indeed if I ever do it again, because you make a very valid point, and it is, I suppose, one of those areas in which trigger warnings play a role, because somebody recovering from a bout of genuine self-harm probably doesn't want to hear the phrase bandied about relatively casually like that in the context of politics. Thank you, James, and good luck, mate. Stay safe, stay strong. You have to, because otherwise, well, the network of obligation that binds everyone else gets ever weaker. Jeff's in Merthyr Tydfil. Jeff, what would you like to say?
Well, morning, James.
Hello.
It's lovely here in sunny Wales, but I'm terrified. You've gone down a whole list of an armful of things that are truly terrifying and unbelievable.
Yes.
And I'm sitting here thinking that once upon a time, many years ago, I did a course on sales.
Oh, yeah.
And one of the things that to demonstrate something that we don't realize, we live an emotional life, James. We make decisions on emotion,
of course,
and once those emotions override logical thought. I love listening to you, but because you're so logical. But
I can be emotional as well, but I take that as the compliment that you intend. Thank you.
And the best way to describe that is was used to describe to me that when you get this tasteless bread in the supermarket, which is the sort of white sliced loaf, which is absolutely tasteless, is like cardboard. They impregnate the package with a chemical that smells like fresh bread. Okay? So they said, look, the logical thing is to eat the packaging and throw away the bread. So your emotions drive everything. And you've got the Trump effect, once you emotionally attach yourself to Trump, you'll never let go. And the same thing has occurred.
Some people do let go. I know that some people let go because they tell me, but not enough, not many. And so it's pointless then to wonder how high the water has to get before people admit that they're wet. They will never admit that they're wet. They won't acknowledge the existence of water. Or they'll go further, like Stephen Glover in the Daily Mail today, and they'll argue that the higher the water level gets, the more likely it is that Boris Johnson is brilliant, or that Boris Johnson will prevail. That the more holes there are in the hull, the safer the ship becomes.
Yes.
Good.
James, I'm 75. Okay, you've got a life in front of you, right? I have no idea what you're going to face, and I am terrified for you. This is fascism, this is racism, this is all of these things, and they are happening to this country. I cannot believe it.
Well, I agree with the last bit. I can't believe it either, although, oddly, I'm a little bit more optimistic than I was at 10 o'clock, partly thanks to you, Jeff, thanks to James, thanks to Katie, thanks to the fellow who's going to jump into one of the dinghies for the return trip to continental Europe, because company is comfort. And, if you can hold on to the truth, even if you are the only one, you will not go mad. And guess what? A programme like this is living proof that you are not the only one. It is 10 minutes to 11. I told you last time we spoke to Paul Caruana Galizia over at Tortoise, who's doing this astonishing podcast series, London Grad. I told you that we would catch up with him whenever new episodes were published. And I know exactly what you thought when you heard me say that. You thought to yourself, I bet James forgets. Well, not this time. We'll be catching up with Paul a little later today because I actually remembered, largely because he reminded me. But the latest episode is another humdinger. I haven't had time to listen to it all yet. But if I were to tell you, for example, that Alexander Lebedev, who is, of course, the Russian oligarch who's now been sanctioned in Canada and described as a member of Vladimir Putin's inner circle, if I were to tell you that in April of 2018, Alexander Lebedev set up an unmonitored line between Boris Johnson, who was then our foreign secretary, and Sergei Lavrov, who is still, of course, Russia's foreign minister, to discuss the Salisbury poisoning. This is what Tortoise is reporting this morning. It's what Paul's podcast is reporting this morning. If I were to tell you that had happened, but that the call never happened, what reason would you come up with, knowing what you know about Boris Johnson, for the reason why this very dubiously sourced, unmonitored line between Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov did not actually take place, despite the line having been established? Can you think of a reason why that might not have happened? 10:52 is the time. I'm fairly willing to guarantee that however unflattering your theory is on this, the reality will make our current Prime Minister look even worse. Speaking of which, 2 independent ethics advisors and an anti-corruption champion, one of whom, Lord Geit, the most recent resignation, had previously stated that resignation from his role would be a last resort that sends a critical signal into the public domain. Rather reluctantly, and indeed a little pessimistically, I'm asking you this morning whether the public domain has now been sufficiently gaslit and groomed by Boris Johnson, his enablers and the client journalists who continue to cheerlead for him, that this message is not actually a critical signal. That the public domain has been so successfully groomed and gaslit by client journalists and sycophantic political colleagues of Boris Johnson that even an independent ethics advisor resigning as a last resort no longer matters in the way that it should. Let's go to Finland next. Why not? Carl is in Kajaani. Carl, what would you like to say?
Good day, James.
Hello,
You're
mate.
a legend.
I'm all right.
Yeah, talking of critical signals, so I'm an ex-submariner, and I want to take that wicked analogy earlier of the ship and the Titanic.
Katie.
Just take it.
Katie on her debut, no less, Carl, on the programme.
On the money. But I want to take a little bit further.
Go on.
Critical signals on a submarine. We had a thing called a general alarm, and when you're off watch and you're asleep, if this general alarm goes off, you know there is something serious. You wake up and everyone goes to a sort of emergency stations. In the last 5 years, the general alarm has been going off on the hour, every hour, and we've got to the point where we don't hear the general alarm. And if by the way, the analogy continues because we're surrounded by water on the submarine.
Of course.
It's gone above the nostrils. So the general alarm is quite a critical and important thing. Now there is the reverse of that when you're asleep and there is background noise and air conditioning going on, if that air conditioning stops, it also wakes you up. So silence wakes you up. And the reason it wakes you up is normally you turn off air conditioning if there's a fire because you don't want to pan the fire. In my opinion, there was a silence moment that wasn't a general alarm, but a silence moment today. And that is when the Prime Minister is saying, well, I don't know why he's resigned. Yeah. And Dominic Raab talking to Nick earlier, I don't know why he's resigned. I'm completely baffled. The silence alarm is, what did the apology to Parliament, the apology to the people of the country, what did it really mean if we don't know why an ethics...
Lessons have been learned.
If we can't understand that the apology was actually hollow and meant nothing, and that's why they don't know why these people are resigning en masse or bit by bit, one by one they're dropping. To me, that's this, not the general alarm, this is the air conditioning's gone off, it's gone silent. And actually what is said doesn't get noticed, but it's much louder than pressing the general alarm.
Yes, I understand exactly what you're saying. I mean, I'm not one to criticise others for the torturous nature of their analogies, because that would be very pot kettle black. but I followed every syllable of that, and it really, really works. You also now have, I mean, abject denials of observable reality. You had Suella Braverman on with Peston claiming that the Northern Irish economy was lagging behind the rest of the United Kingdom, which is the polar opposite of the truth. That's another air conditioning moment, isn't it, really?
It is. It's just the silence means that we've been conditioned not to recognise the alarm, and actually what becomes much more powerful is the silence saying, I think you used the phrase, there's nothing to see here, move along.
Yeah.
I think
just another independent ethics advisor resigning. Just nothing to see here. Move along. Let's talk about. I don't know. Refugees. We're supposed to be talking about refugees, aren't we?
To be frank, that's what's waking me up right now. What's waking me up is that it's not an alarm. It's sort of like an invisible alarm that has much more impact. I'm so sorry. I mean it so genuinely. I really do think, in number 10, not me, but in number 10, things were not going right, and definitely there's some people to blame. And
not me.
But I'm very sorry. Not me. I'm very sorry. And now I have no idea why this guy's resigned, Dominic Raab. I have no idea why. You should have an idea, mate. It's pretty damn clear.
You make a brilliant point, actually. It is, and one doesn't feel any sympathy for Raab. I think his colours were pretty clear long before Boris Johnson became Prime Minister. But you have that absolute certainty, or that absolute proof, that the closer you get to Boris Johnson, the more corrupted and the more soiled you become, which is why the ones with reputations, or what passes for a reputation still intact, at least in part, generally stay so quiet. You don't often see Gove doing the rounds of the studios claiming that black is white and up is down and positive is negative. So it almost seems sometimes to be a shrinking pool of people who are prepared to do it. But I presume at some point you have to. You don't see Ben Wallace doing it that often either, despite the fact that there is currently a war raging in Ukraine. And of course, the sort of Therese Coffeys and the Grant Shapps of this world have long ago ceased to be what you might call honest brokers. And yet on it goes. I mean, it is just nuts. Listen, hey, if you disagree with all of this, you're not just welcome on the programme, you are actively beseeched to come on and tell us why it doesn't matter that 2 independent ethics advisors and an anti-corruption champion have gone, and all the other things that are just proof of what a bang-up job he's doing. You don't have to be quite as crackers as Stephen Glover in the Daily Mail, essentially claiming that the more water comes on board the Titanic, the stronger the Titanic will prove itself to be, which is what he's doing about Boris Johnson today. But I guess, does it just sort of really come... Well, it doesn't matter how awful it is, at least he's better than Keir Starmer. Is that where we are now? I mean, this... Okay, true or false? And there's some great suggestions for why that unmonitored phone call between Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov never took place, I can tell you that one person has actually got it right. So here's another little game for you. True or false? The Telegraph today publishes an article under the following headline. Britain is in ruins thanks to the failed dogmas of our permanent leftist elite. True or false? The Daily Telegraph's comment pages today carry an article under the headline, Britain is in ruins thanks to the failed dogmas of our permanent leftist elite. And just to make it a little bit more fun, true or false, it's written by a very prominent Brexiter and somewhat overlooked. Well, you tell me. I'll tell you after the news whether that has actually happened or not. 3 minutes after 11, and it was, of course, true. There is an article today by the editor of the Sunday Telegraph, writing, I think, in the Daily. Britain is in ruins thanks to the failed dogmas of our permanent leftist elite. That's a prominent Brexiter commenting upon a country that has had a Conservative government for the last 12 years. This isn't normal. You've got Stephen Glover in the Daily Mail essentially arguing that the more water is taken on board by the Titanic Boris Johnson, then the safer and the stronger the Titanic Boris Johnson becomes. You've got Alistair Heath in the Telegraph claiming that Britain is in ruins thanks to the failed dogmas of our permanent leftist elite. This is not normal. This is the stuff of fascism. I really, really hesitate to use that word, but it has to be used occasionally. This is what the path to fascism looks like. And I don't think that we're going to end up there. I really don't. But I didn't think America would either. And now you've got prominent Republican politicians concluding that they can't continue their careers unless they amplify and endorse Donald Trump's. Plus, twice I've done that now. And it's not deliberate. I'm not doing a ha-ha-ha. I got them mixed up with each other. But Donald Trump's blatant lies about election fraud. It's not normal. 12 years of Tory rule, the Brexit that you campaigned for and dreamt of, and now you're describing our country as being in ruins thanks to the failed dogmas of our permanent leftist elite. This is absolutely crackers. But here we are, contemplating another mad day in Britain where the Prime Minister has lost his second independent ethics advisor in 3 years. And he's a man, Lord Geit, who nearly went over previous issues as well. He was unhappy about things that had happened previous to this. The questions about whether Johnson had breached the ministerial code apparently saw him close to quitting last month. For me, the Owen Paterson thing would have been a bit of a deal breaker. I can't remember whether he was in the job by then or not, but trying essentially to tear up the rule book on parliamentary standards because one of your cronies had broken the rules is, again, the stuff of fascists. What's that? You've broken the rules. Oh, well, we'll change the rules then. Whoa. I mean, that's kind of what happened yesterday. European Court on Human Rights is the body which arbitrates the European Convention upon Human Rights, and they found that you can't deport people to Rwanda unless it's been established that the practice is legal. So we're going to hear them all queuing up to talk about, well, we should leave that then. Don't like the rules, change the rule. It's actually incredible. But here we are. Boris Johnson, of course, issued a humble and sincere apology to Geit in January for withholding messages from the inquiry into the refurbishment of his Downing Street flat. 6 minutes after 11, I'd forgotten about that. So Geit concluded that there hadn't been epic dodginess in the refurbishment of the flat, and then evidence emerged that he hadn't been given by Boris Johnson. Think about that just for a minute. January this year, Boris Johnson apologised to Lord Geit for withholding messages from the inquiry. I can't even remember what the excuse was. Had he lost his phone? Had he accidentally deleted WhatsApp? What was the tissue of nonsense that he served up to the great British public on that occasion? And he was compelled to offer a sincere apology, a humble and sincere apology to Lord Geit for not disclosing messages profoundly pertinent to the ludicrous attempts to refurbish the Downing Street flat to the tune of £80,000 with donors' money. 7 minutes after 11 is the time. Where does it go? I'm not telling you why the phone call was cancelled yet, because we're going to talk to Paul Caruana Galizia later about the latest episode of London grab, but I'll read you some of the suggestions. George says, did MI5 step in and say, what the hell are you doing, Johnson? You utter fool. Well, George, no, because this involves a trip upon which the Foreign Secretary of the United Kingdom did not take his security detail, which might give you a clue as to what weekend we are talking about. Slightly less generous suggestion here. I'd say that the call didn't happen because Boris Johnson wasn't paid first. If only this was as simple as naked financial gain. If only the corruption that we were contemplating at the heart of British democracy was something as simple as pursuit of pounds. But no, it's not. I don't know what it is, to be honest with you. Steve Bannon, of course, as Julie reminds us, called it flooding the zone with excrement, is the euphemism I will deploy. I don't buy that, actually. I mean, Steve Bannon did do that, and they do that, but I don't think that's what's happening here. I don't think the resignation of Lord Geit is something that Boris Johnson has willed or wished for. It may accidentally flood the zone with excrement, but I don't think it's deliberate. Rwanda probably is. You shouldn't make light of the plight of the people faced with deportation, but you could spend 100 years making light of their plight and not come close to the contempt with which Priti Patel treats them and Boris Johnson treats them. But that is probably not really about actually seeing people transported to Africa against their will. It's much more to do with front pages and headlines at a time when the NHS is in a parlous state. All manner of areas where a decent Prime Minister would be working tirelessly to improve situations. We haven't even mentioned the cost of living. But here we are. 11:09 is the time. How are you doing, really? Having spoken to James in Exeter, 10 years a teacher, and feeling a degree of despair at the prospect of trying to teach his children that the rules matter, or, to use that phrase that Boris Johnson's own teacher so famously deployed, that the network of obligation that binds everyone else is important. And you have a Prime Minister who clearly holds it in complete contempt. 03456060973 is the number you need. How would you? I mean, listen, I can't promise we won't have a bit of a scrap, but how can anyone still be clinging on to the idea that this man is a suitable Prime Minister when his own independent ethics advisors clearly consider that he isn't? Alison's in Crawley. Alison, what would you like to say?
Oh, morning, James.
Hello, Alison.
I mean, the thing I feel about it is that the political party needs to, the Conservative Party needs to step up. Exactly what has not happened in America. I mean, we have a storming of the Capitol, and the Republican Party at that point failed to stand up and say, this is not Republican politics. We do not endorse this man. And and now look where they are. Yeah. They're dependent on him to endorse all their candidates. If the Tory party don't stand up and be counted on this, then I don't know what happens to them, because the initial problem is they put, they endorsed a candidate to be MP who, in our lifetimes, in the history, I think, of politics in this country, would not, well, it's probably a bit...
Oh, the standard, the 2019 intake in the Tory party is incredible.
Well, they would never have endorsed a man who you could YouTube and listen to the Darius Guppy tape. That would be the end of a political career. You would not have got a candidacy for any political party.
Are you sure? I mean, because that was a long time ago, and he became Mayor of London. He became... I mean, at what point in British history would that have been a career-ending revelation?
I think at any point, no political party would have taken that risk. The idea that you could find someone who was prepared to give the home address of a fellow journalist, so that
one of his mates from school could get him beaten up. But is that a mark? I think, isn't that just evidence of Johnson rather than anything bigger?
It is, but then how on earth did the Conservative Party ever say, yes, this man's fit to be an MP and represent the Conservative Party? He never was. And if you start to,
But he became editor of The Spectator after that. He became a Daily Telegraph columnist. There's all manner of institutions that promoted him and that continued to promote him after that happened. It's not just the Tory party.
But what we're talking about today is a complete disrespect for the standards in public life.
Yes.
And actually, that is a man, that's why we have these standards. And it really suits the Conservative Party to sort of put forward the idea that, everyone's all the same. They're all like this. They absolutely are not all like this. this. Boris Johnson is the first Prime Minister ever to have broken the law in office. Prime Ministers in my lifetime have never stood at the dispatch box and lied and stayed in office. That has never, ever happened. They have been, they've spun things, they've, put things in a way that
embellished, exaggerated,
them, all of that. But they have never actually lied. And you can forget about Partygate. Just look at the Stefanovic video. He lied many, many times at the dispatch box, and nobody has taken any action.
I don't know if you're aware of this, but the battle to have Harriet Harman removed from the Privileges Committee after Chris Bryant recused himself, the battle to have Harriet Harman removed from that committee has started today in some of the right-wing newspapers. So it is an astonishing assault upon all manner of standards. But who's going to call a stop to it? No one's really playing this game with me yet, Alison.
The only people who can call a stop to it at this point is the Conservative Party, and there are some members like Tugendhat and various. I can't.
But
remember
they have
names,
done. They've shot their bolt, arguably, haven't they?
The 1922 committee and the senior members of the Conservative Party and all the MPs need to stand up and say, this is too much. This is not about Conservative values. I'm of the left. I worked in politics for 10 years. I'm of the left. But this is not a right-left issue.
No, of course it's not.
This is a decency issue, and it is undermining all of our politics, and we should all care about it. And I believe the Conservative Party is better than this.
I do too, and I know that upsets some people when you say that. Because Nye Bevan wouldn't agree with that analysis, would he? That the Conservative Party is better than this. He considered them to be, I think, lower than vermin was the famous phrase that he used. Or that may be.
But you know what? I think even Nye Bevan probably didn't think they were liars and cheats. Actually,
because they weren't.
Exactly. This is very different, and the idea that the whole idea, Keir Starmer and Partygate, having a pint of beer. I mean, that's yet to be decided, and what have you, and all the rest of it. But that is all about an attempt to say, "Oh, look, they're all the same."
2 weeks of front pages in the Daily Mail on that one. Two whole weeks of front pages.
It is incomparable. Boris Johnson was presiding over a blooming frat house at number 10 during COVID, while people were missing their loved ones' funerals and not being with them at their deathbeds, and he was partying, having set those rules that prevented people. And they're trying to compare it to Keir Starmer having a beer and a pizza after a day of campaigning because they had pre-ordered the pizza or some such.
I believe it was a curry, Alison. Facts matter. I believe it was a curry. Because then you have that hilarious joke, beer korma or Keir Starmer, you see. It sounds slightly similar.
Right.
Before you go, you can't have Tugendhat because he's already made his feelings clear. You need someone previously loyal to stand up and say enough is enough. Who would you put your money on?
But that's the real anxiety. I don't know who I'd put my money on. What is the matter with them all?
I don't know. I do not know. I can tell you that the Paymaster General, Michael Ellis, just said in the House of Commons, the Prime Minister maintains the highest standards in public life and will continue to do so. The party asked you to ignore the evidence of your eyes and ears. It was their final, most terrible command. It is 18 minutes after 11. Do you see what I mean? Because I had forgotten about the apology, the humble and sincere apology that Boris Johnson made to Lord Guy all that time ago in Cheques Notes, January. I never do Cheques Notes because I think it's become quite cliched, but it is quite a funny rhetorical device, isn't it? Cheques Notes, January, humble and sincere apology for literally withholding messages from Lord Guy's own inquiry into the refurbishment of the Downing Street flat. So I'd forgotten about that. You see what I mean about there being so much now that it's so hard to keep track of. It's as if you are in an ocean of water and you can't separate the buckets. Because I'd forgotten completely, I'm not even sure we paid this the attention it deserved at the time, about Lord Agnew. Do you remember Lord Agnew? Lord Agnew was the government's Minister for Counter-Fraud. Do you know why he resigned? He resigned over the government's handling of fraudulent COVID business loans, saying, and I quote, "Given that I am the Minister for Counter-Fraud, it seems somewhat dishonest for me to stay on in that role." So now we've got one anti-corruption champion, one minister for counter-fraud, and 2 independent advisors on ministerial ethics resigning from the government because they think the government is guilty of the things that they are there to guard against. But hey-ho, he's doing his best and he gets all the big calls right. 03456060973 is the number you need. What do you do if you voted for these people? And this is not an unfair question. I voted for Boris Johnson to be Mayor of London in 2008 because he was good on Have I Got News For You, and I wasn't really paying attention. You may find this hard to believe given how I wang on about it these days, but I wasn't even that political when I started in this job. My background was in showbiz journalism and gossip columns on Fleet Street. So I get it. I mean, I'm obviously Brexit. None of us were qualified to. But how you're listening to this now and you're sort of thinking, oh, Lordy, I can't really argue with him anymore. There's just so much evidence. We've got Alex Allen, we've got Lord Geit, we've got John Penrose, we've got Lord Agnew. I mean, everyone is turning on him in the end. And the ones that haven't are absolute apologies for politicians and pundits. How do you deal with it? And is anyone going to have a go? Is anyone going to have a go at predicting who might pull the trigger or raise the standard? Who might raise the standard on resistance to this cavalcade of corruption? And it has to be someone previously loyal. Some people have already moved to their credit, whether it's Tobias Ellwood or Tom Tugendhat, or even, because even a stopped clock is right twice a day, even Brexit hardman Steve Baker and Andrew Braindead Bridgen. They've all made some sort of stand, albeit for very different reasons. And I think in the cases of Baker and Bridgen, it's probably because they don't really understand what's going on, but they've accidentally done the right thing anyway. Who's going to be the loyalist who says enough is enough? It was Geoffrey Howe, wasn't it, for Thatcher? Wasn't it Geoffrey Howe who sounded the alarm most? I could be wrong on that. I was only a kid. 22 after 11 is the time. Let's go to the Isle of Wight. Lovely part of the world. I bet it's nice there today. Mick, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. You all right? Yeah, it is. It's lovely today, and it's Isle of Wight Festival as well this weekend. Glorious. So they're all going to get burnt. I used to listen to you a lot, James, and even like through all the kind of Brexit campaigning and things like that. But I actually stopped listening because I felt a bit unfairly berated.
I'm sorry to hear that.
A bit embarrassed because so I suppose this is a kind of Brexit apology. Really,
you don't owe me any apologies. Stopping listening was a bit unfair, but we're doing okay without you, Mick. So welcome back into the fold. Welcome back.
Yeah. But I mean, what I wanted to say is my Brexit vote again. I've said it again. I've admitted it again. If I bought that on a credit card, I'd be putting a claim in under Section 75 because I want my money back.
Nicely put.
And if they keep lying without accountability or recourse, this is just going to happen again and again and again. And the lying seems to be a disease, and the affections kind of set all the way. In fact, all the way down to local council, and it'll go further. If these are people running a country, if they seem to be getting away with telling lies and with nothing happening to them at all, no kind of comeback on it. I mean, my old dad used to say to me, "A liar is a thief because they steal." There's no difference between a liar and a thief. And it just makes me angrier that
it's a really powerful point from your old man, that, because it speaks to what James in Exeter was saying as a teacher about not knowing how he can continue to teach standards to children when the most powerful person in the country rides roughshod over them all the time. And it makes me wonder, actually, Mick, about that line about the network of obligations that binds everyone else. We forget perhaps some people are probably bound by that network of obligations, but a little bit reluctantly. It's because we have public decency and it's because we have standards in public life that some people actually behave themselves. We naively think sometimes everybody will behave themselves through choice, but actually some people behave themselves perhaps through necessity, through fear of penalty, fear of punishment. And of course, having a Prime Minister who treats the network of obligation that binds everyone else with contempt, as you suggest, it frees up other people who might be flirting with bad behaviour or flirting with dishonesty or theft. They sort of think, well, hang on a minute, if he's got away with it, do you know what? I think I might have a crack at that myself.
Absolutely. It's eroded down right through society. And if it isn't stopped, if somebody doesn't get pulled up for it and, a spectacle made of it, then
where do we go next?
Go on and on and on.
Well, I think we might already be in that role, in that zone.
It's pointless anybody standing up at the dispatch box and saying anything, because the chances are you shouldn't listen to it because it's a lie. Is it a lie? Is it the truth?
Well, that's what. And we're back in America.
Brexit is the biggest one of all. I'm like I said, I'm kind of angry and embarrassed that I. That I voted for that on a load of lies, and it's become apparent now. And I'm not a stupid person, Clearly. And yet I feel stupid that I was kind of flummoxed into what.
Well, you're not. I tell you what. There's proof that there's proof that you're not stupid, because you are recognising what's happened. I don't think there's any shame or any need to apologise for it. It's not as if you're writing an article for the Daily Telegraph after 12 years of Tory rule, claiming that the country's in ruins because of a leftist elite. Mick, and that's what stupid looks like. And he's the editor of the Sunday Telegraph. So I mean this most sincerely. Give yourself a break, mate. Honestly. Stay safe. You're going to carry on listening now. Have I got you back on board?
Yes.
Now
that I've got that off my chest and I've actually admitted it, I'm not going as far as admitting for voting for Boris Johnson, but I've got enough off my chest now.
One step at a time. Thank you, Mick. I appreciate that. It's coming up to 11:27. He's right, though, isn't he? I mean, what? I'd forgotten that. It's a bit sort of happy-clappy of me to think, well, everybody likes the network of obligation that binds everyone else. But they don't. Some people probably resent it a little bit. Some people resent it a lot. But we all abide by it because the alternative is chaos. Guess who's just sashayed into the studio?
Much fitter now. No huffing and puffing.
Thankfully. We were worried about you yesterday, Theo, because there's a lot of pollen around as well at the moment.
It was just running up Whitehall. It's a slight uphill from Westminster back to the studio. But actually, just to bring you up to date with, or not to bring you up to date, because Lord Geidt, of course, appeared in front of the Public Administration and Constitutional Affairs Select Committee on Tuesday morning, and I was telling you about the fact that he was insisting that he wasn't going to resign, and then he did resign. It's just worth listening to this exchange with John McDonnell from Tuesday morning.
There are few instruments available to an independent advisor, and important to consider what is going to work best in the interest, not of me, but of preserving the integrity of the system and of the code, and in making it work, in advising the Prime Minister on holding ministers, including a Prime Minister, publicly to account. So again, I haven't given you a direct answer, but I don't think there was ever a single direct proposition in my own mind.
I'm going to take that answer as at least it was on the agenda.
We've mentioned before in evidence that it's always on the agenda as an available remedy to a particular problem, and one that my predecessor indeed exercised in November.
Now, it didn't sound there like Lord Geidt had any intention of resigning.
Are you sure? I don't know if I like it when we disagree on that. It sounded to me like a man trying very, very hard to sound like a man who had no intention of resigning.
He was talking, of course, in the past tense,
yes.
and that
I'd
was
forgotten,
the question.
I'd forgotten about the humble and sincere apology over the messages that were never given to him during the inquiry into the flat refurbishment. So he's got, a grievance established already in HR terms.
But we still don't know why he has resigned. Now, Michael Ellis, he's the Cabinet Office Minister who's usually dispatched, he's a lawyer by trade, he's usually dispatched the House of Commons to answer difficult, urgent questions. This time it came from Angela Rayner's deputy on the Labour front bench, Fleur Anderson. Michael Ellis promised that we would have the exchange of letters very shortly.
The members of this House will recognise that Lord Geidt has demonstrated diligence and thoughtfulness in the way he has discharged his role over the course of the past year. We have benefited hugely from this service. Now, the Prime Minister will be issuing a letter, Mr. Speaker, in relation to Lord Geidt's announcement. Both Lord Geidt's letter and the Prime Minister's reply will be deposited in the House shortly.
Now, what has happened is that it appears the government has delayed publishing the letter until, of course, that urgent question of finish, and there's a business statement in the House where MPs can ask anything, so that they are not scrutinised by MPs in Parliament. You'll particularly like this answer to a question from the SNP's Carol Monaghan.
Is there any point in appointing a new ethics advisor for a Prime Minister with no ethics?
Well, of course, the Prime Minister maintains the highest standards in public life and will continue to do so. And despite all of the scurrilous suggestions otherwise, she's given no evidence to indicate in what way she's referring to a lack of ethics.
That was Michael Ellis there referring to Cormac.
Pathetic,
so we
it?
still don't have...
And the lack of ethics, you could say it was the thing that he offered a sincere and humble apology to the independent advisor that's just resigned would be evidence of a lack of ethics, or it could be the resignation of the previous independent advisor after he failed to act upon a report that found Priti Patel to be a shameless bully. That could be evidence of the lack of ethics, or it could be the fact that their anti-fraud minister resigned over all the COVID fraud that could be pointed out as a lack of ethics. And we've forgotten one. I mean, amazingly, we've got 4 on our list now of significant resignations from the political sphere. We're not including the backroom staff like Munira Mirza or even Dominic Cummings. Good God. His own brother, Joe Johnson, you'll remember, resigned after saying that he had wrestled with the tension between family loyalty and the national interest, but having come down on the side of the national interest, he resigned from the Parliamentary Conservative Party. I don't want to be rude about the fella, but he'd still accepted a seat in the House of Lords, though, which doesn't exactly speak of a cringing or a crying conscience, but the list is almost endless. Will we ever see this letter, Theo?
Well, we're told we're going to receive it very shortly.
What does that mean?
I was told it was initially...
Do you think they're waiting for Mystery Hour? Do you think they're waiting for Mystery Hour to start in the hope that I won't read it out on the radio?
We were told it was going to be 10:30, then it became imminently, then it became 11:15. Now it's looking like, well, it's going to be sometime around,
what?
If we're lucky, just before Mystery Hour, but we still don't have the letter. And of course, there is this. That's it.
Holly Harris is here now with the headlines. And it is actually farcical. And I'm sorry to go on about this, but because it's my job, it's not your job. But it is hard to, as we've discussed a few times now recently, it's hard to keep focus, because the zone is being flooded with excrement, as Steve Bannon suggested. I don't think it's a master plan to do so. I think these wedge issues are deliberate. I think the way that they desperately try to inflame division and furious rows about things like deporting people to Rwanda. I mean, I don't know if you're aware of this, but Israel tried this not long ago. Maybe that's what Priti Patel was talking about when she had that secret meeting with the Israeli government after lying to Theresa May, something for which she got fired from the last Conservative government, but which qualifies as grounds for promotion in Boris Johnson's Brexit Britain. But Israel actually had a go at this for about 5 years with a third safe country programme, sending people to either Rwanda or Ethiopia. Guess why it failed? Lack of setbacks, lack of cooperation from the people who were deported, and media reports that ultimately led to Rwanda and Ethiopia pulling out. It was Netanyahu's government who bowed to public pressure to end the presence of an estimated 50,000 Africans who had come mainly from Eritrea and Sudan. They weren't even recognised as asylum seekers, so it wasn't even as cruel and callous as Priti Patel's scheme, but it also failed miserably. That's the only precedent I can find, really, for the plan. But hey ho. 11:37 is the time. We should take a moment now to reflect upon the anniversary today, the 6th anniversary of the murder of Joe Cox. You may have overlooked this. And it is particularly poignant, isn't it, given that disgusting poster of Nigel Farage's, the Breaking Point one, which essentially started the ball rolling for the sort of vile anti-refugee sentiment that is currently culminating in attempts to deport people who've done absolutely nothing wrong, by the way, except get here in the same way that Priti Patel's parents got here, or Nadeem Zahawi and his parents got here. The laws may have changed, but they've been changed by the people seeking to deport them. It has a particular poignance that the 6th anniversary has fallen in the middle, or that the anniversary has fallen in the middle of the culmination of what started that morning when Nigel Farage unveiled that disgusting poster with the very distinct, and you have to presume deliberate, echoes of Nazi propaganda. And shortly afterwards, Jo Cox was assassinated by a white supremacist terrorist. So a particularly timely moment, perhaps, to reflect upon her and her legacy. You'll remember the phrase that has come in many ways to embody her ideology and her life. We are far more united and have far more in common than that which divides us. The belief that a more equal world is possible at the heart of her politics and, of course, at the heart of her party's politics. I'd refer you also, actually, to her sister, Kim Leadbitter, who now sits in her seat in the House of Commons and who was one of my favourite guests on Full Disclosure. If you haven't listened to that episode, it's rather special and perhaps a nice way to remind yourself of Jo Cox's life and legacy. The 6th anniversary today of her murder. 11:39 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I don't know, do we add Michael Gove to the list? Lewis in Putney suggests we should, because, of course, when he stepped down from Boris Johnson's first attempt to become Prime Minister, Michael Gove said he wasn't fit to lead the country. But he's since reverse-ferreted on that, Lewis, so I don't know whether he gets to sit alongside Alex Allen and Lord Geit and John Penrose and Lord Agnew and his own brother Joe Johnson as people who have essentially given up their own political careers in order to call out the corruption of Boris Johnson and or his government. So Gove, no, I don't think Gove gets it, because he reversed on that one. And currently, of course, sits in the cabinet as the Minister for Levelling Up, I think. Peter's in Loch Lomond, back to Scotland. Peter, what would you like to say?
I'm not actually in Loch Lomond, James. I'm on the side of it, if you know what I mean.
That's a very good point. Thank you, you pedant. I'll push you in it if you carry on like that.
Well, I'll reverse it by saying that I wish there was a voice of yours coming out of Scotland, and there isn't, and that's why I listen to you on the mornings rather than the BBC programmes, because they won't do this. There was a storm of protest last week after Scotland announced that there was going to be a new referendum in Scotland. There were howls of indignation, orchestrated indignation from the assembled unionist press and unionist social media outlets. How could anyone blame Scotland for not wanting to get out of this mess? We've got you quoted Orwell in passing earlier, and I found another Orwell quote that fits it so well. It's a short one. In the end, the party would announce that 2 and 2 made 5, and you would have to believe it.